Welcome to ESG Decoded, where we unravel the business complexities at the intersection of environmental, social, and governance issues.
I'm Erica Schiller, and I'm joined by my Climeco colleagues, Emma Cox and Anna Stablem.
Get ready to explore the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and ethical leadership, the dynamic forces shaping our global economy.
From climate action to social responsibility, we're here to decode the ESG landscape by interviewing interesting leading figures across the globe that will empower you with actionable insights.
Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or just embarking on your sustainability journey, this podcast is your compass for navigating the future of responsible business practices.
Let's decode ESG together.
Welcome to ESG Decoded, where we unpack the business of sustainability. I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Christina Ross. Christina is the head of science and impact at Credo Beauty, where she leads a retailer's efforts in ingredient safety, sustainable packaging, and industry-wide advocacy for a cleaner beauty future. With a background as a senior scientist and earlier roles in environmental consulting, Christina brings rigorous scientific expertise to Credo's mission of transparency and accountability. Under her leadership, Credo has advanced several pioneering initiatives, from developing the Credo Clean Standard and its scientist-vetted dirty list to co-founding the Pact Collective and leading packaging circularity breakthroughs through recycled beauty waste. Christina has been a visible voice for change in the beauty industry, having testified on policy issues and contributed to major collaborations focused on ingredient hazard data and transparency. Christina, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Emma. It's great to see you.
Wonderful. Well, let's get into it. And without further ado, I wanted to kick us off, Christina, by asking you what originally inspired your passion for science and sustainability. This is something that you and I talked about. I think one of our first conversations was, oh my goodness, toxicology. Tell me more about that. And actually, come to find out, there are a lot of sustainability professionals with a toxicology background. Maybe not a lot, but I know a handful, surprisingly. So tell me, Christina, about what originally inspired you about science and sustainability, and maybe what brought them together.
Yeah, they pair very well together, which I have learned over the years. It's not something I sought out early on, but I've kind of drifted into throughout my career. You know, getting into science wasn't always a fully fleshed out idea in my mind. Both of my parents are artists, and I think I was just driven to study something that felt more tangible to me, to understand the world around me. I was a terrible science student in high school, and when I went to college, I really wanted to kind of prove to myself that I could do something, that I didn't grow up around, that I didn't do well in before. So I surprised the registrar by signing up for a couple of different science classes in my freshman year, first semester, and really struggled through them and became fast friends with the smart kids in my class, and realized as I got more and more into it, and I went to a pretty small liberal arts college, that this was possible, and I could push myself in this arena. So just continued on the track, really found an interest in biology and kind of learning how the world worked from that perspective. These were new concepts to me. Chemistry, I found fascinating. I've never been a great math student, but chemistry really filled that, niche for me, and just kind of continued on and had a whole lot of fun with it. After graduating, I went on to get my master's in public health. And in between those 2 years, I interned for the New York Attorney General's office. And during that internship, they were actually suing the EPA for well water contamination for a particular metal called manganese. And manganese is a nutritional requirement, and it's in infant formula, but it is also a contaminant in well water specifically. So we were suing the EPA because when you mixed well water with infant formula, you ended up with too high of a dose of manganese, something over the nutritional requirement for an infant. And that opened my world up into toxicology. So I was lucky enough that I was already enrolled and going to public health school And one of the principles of public health is toxicology. So I was able to really drive my graduate education towards toxicology after that internship. And, just over the years kept pivoting my career towards what interested me. And, I've been here about 15 years now in the industry. And the way that we've seen the discourse around climate and sustainability change, since I first entered the hard sciences to today has been drastic. And it's been fun to follow that conversation, take on the projects and the career roles that have interested in me. And sustainability is one that touches all facets of all of our lives. So it's continued to interest me. And I've been lucky enough, to become an expert through my career roles.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that story, Christina. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about, because I'm not a scientist by background, I would love to hear just a little bit more about how do you think science is helping with the climate sort of journey and that we're all on? And do you feel that your background in science and toxicology has helped you in certain conversations, or have you had to lean on it more heavily? Yeah, talk to us about the intersection there.
Yeah, well, of course, climate science is a whole, field in and of itself, and I'm not a climate scientist. And in fact, I have a joke with my family. They'll ask me different questions all the time, and I always say I'm not that kind of scientist because there's so many different facets, and as you focus heavily, you really become an expert in your area. So toxicology and public health is my area, and there's a lot of relationship between toxicology and sustainability, as we, mentioned earlier on. Toxicology really focuses on taking a look at exposure versus risk and the systems at play that create both a risk and then the exposure, or looking at a hazard, looking at how one is exposed to that hazard, and then what equates to a risk from that exposure. So it's really systems thinking, and sustainability is the same. So, if you look at what is something comprised of, where did it come from, who's using it, how is it being shipped, what's happening next, all of those processes and systems are very similar to when you're looking at kind of an exposure equation from toxicology. So they do have a similar rigor in thought process. And, it's always about using the data and the evidence that we have, to bridge what we know to where we can go. And that's, an underline through any scientific discipline. So when you're looking at sustainability and climate science, you're still needing to focus on a hypothesis, proving that out with evidence and data, and then putting systems in play and seeing how they work. But toxicology specifically, because of that exposure risk scenario, it's really the same when you think about it at a high level with sustainability. Is climate is an exposure and a risk situation. It's really a risk benefit approach at the end of the day.
I love that perspective, and I love the intersectionality too. When I think of toxicology too, I connected a bit to, and I think you already did, to human health, right? And how much that is connected to sustainability and our environment. So thank you for sharing that perspective. So I want to get into Credo a little bit, Christina, and you sit in a very unique role where Credo is a retailer. And you and I have talked about this a few times, but I think when you sit in a retailer position, it's a little bit different than sitting in a brand position from a sustainability strategy and implementation standpoint. So can you sort of talk to us a little bit more about Credo as a company, tell our listeners just a little bit about what Credo does, and maybe then from there, we'd love to just explore sort of the relationship that the retailer has with the brand and how that comes to life from a sustainability perspective.
So Credo is the largest clean beauty retailer in the U.S. We were founded by former Sephora executives a little over a decade ago. We've got 16 stores and obviously an online presence. And really our mission is all about our impact and how we can impact both human health and the environment. So what ingredients are being used in the product? What is a product packaged in? How are they shipped? How are our brands and ourselves accounting for greenhouse gas emissions? What's the decarbonization plan? Really looking at the industry holistically. Our definition of clean beauty has been kind of a bellwether of the industry. I feel that our founders have been pioneers, in restricting substances and making ingredients safer, for human health and environmental health. But over the past decade, we've really morphed into focusing on sustainability just as much. It's kind of table stakes now to think about removing ingredients from products. And the consumer is really voting with their dollars in terms of focusing on clean beauty. But we still have a definite gap between the conventional clean beauty, so to speak, and sustainability metrics. So we're pushing hard as a retailer to focus on sustainability, to educate the brands around, packaging decisions like lightweighting or using PCR plastic. And as you mentioned, being a retailer is a really unique position because we essentially have a multiplier effect. We're not one brand. We're able to have our hands in a lot of different brands. And for the brands who want to be sold at Credo, they get the access to our Clean Standard, our Credo Clean Standard, which is tangibly a 50-page document. And I come before Credo from a consulting background. I worked for a couple of different national firms working in product stewardship. And so I say all the time, this Clean Standard, while yes, it's a list of requirements that brands must meet, it's just as much a guidance document for best practices for brands. So we have our requirements in there, but we also have our recommendations and best practices and material hierarchies and ingredient hierarchies. So we have the banned and the restricted, but we also have the recommendations. And we're going further by launching a Credo Qualified program, which is a business-to-business qualification so that we're able to connect brands with the contract manufacturing partners, with the raw material suppliers, the labs who are doing this strong work, who do have decarbonization plans and, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions conducted. This kind of level of transparency hasn't been done in the industry. I often say it's a black box behind the scenes. Most consumers assume that their products are being made by the brands that they're buying from, and that's not the case. There's a whole industry around contract manufacturing and packaging suppliers and otherwise. So not only are we getting the brands behind our mission, but we're working on the industry as well. And we do a lot of advocacy in the space in terms of testifying on Capitol Hill, speaking to state legislatures, otherwise, to kind of push this mission forward.
It's a complex web that you're navigating, Christina. And yes, understatement of the year, of the century. But I think, too, interesting to think about from a retailer perspective, I would imagine there are initiatives that you work on that are standard across all your brands, right? So would love to have you explain maybe an example of what are some of the sort of retailers, wide for all of your brands initiatives that you work on versus maybe, each brand is very different and unique in terms of their profiles and, their sustainability attributes. And maybe there's an example you could give of a unique sort of brand activation that you've supported as sort of the retailer arm. Just trying to understand sort of, a real life example of each of those types of initiatives.
Yeah. So, our Clean Standard has requirements. So all brands need to formulate without the ingredients, that we've prohibited. But we also have requirements or kind of a shared language around sustainability in terms of packaging. So we have a requirement that all brands use post-consumer recycled plastic in their packaging to eliminate the reliance on, these petrochemical derived virgin plastic materials. So the vast majority of our brands are using 50% or more PCR in their packaging. For the brands who can't meet that 50% PCR, that may be because they are lightweighting their packaging, they are doing refillable format, which needs higher durability or otherwise. So we very much work with brands on an individual basis. It's hard to have a flat rule across the industry or across our assortment on these things because, to your point, every brand is different. And each consumer of the brands, different things resonate with them more. So we'll have, certain brands that are plastic-free completely and other brands that are more, focused on luxury and the experience of the packaging. So they want that durability, so they choose the refillable route. What we really focus on is brands to leverage data in these decisions. So we have funded a couple of life cycle analyses or LCAs on packaging decisions so that brands can take a look at this data and decide what makes the most sense for their business, the partners that they work with, and then, of course, the end result of the emissions or the carbon that's related to the packaging decisions. One of the larger, areas that we felt as a problem with being a retailer is the end of life. So our consumer often opts to recycle packaging. However, a lot of beauty packaging is smaller than the size of a yogurt cup, which is kind of the baseline for being able to do curbside recycling. So we co-founded a nonprofit known as Pact Collective as a landfill diversion program. So customers can bring back their beauty empties in store or mail them back so that we're diverting these packages from the landfill. And what, is fun being at Credo is kind of being a proof point to what's possible in the industry. So we then co-created with Pact a new resin, a new material called New Matter, which is a combination of those recycled beauty empties and some virgin plastic, as well as some ocean-bound plastic, to make an entirely new resin that Credo has created packaging from, but more importantly, has allowed it to be marketed and available on the market as a resin for other brands who are members of Pact to purchase to make their own packaging solutions. So, to broadly answer your question, we are trying to be a solutions-oriented retailer just as much as, top-down, here are the requirements, here's what you must do to meet our requirements to be sold. Instead, it's here's what's possible. Isn't this exciting? And then, doing the consumer education so that this resonates with the consumer and they're spending their dollars on these decisions, which are ultimately, benefiting both the industry and hopefully the environment and climate too.
So much to unpack there. I feel like first of all, let me say thank you for demonstrating that a retailer or a brand can invest in innovation for the industry. I think that is true leadership. And I've heard you talk about the Pact Collective before, and really that's what stands out so much to me is that you're investing in industry collaboration and advancement. And so I think that's really admirable. So thank you for doing that. I love the concept that sustainability and decarbonization are not a competitive advantage. Instead, we should be sort of working together to advance this mission. So thank you for doing that. Well, let's sort of get over to a topic that is near and dear to my heart, to Climeco's heart, which is product certification. I know you're dabbling in this space. I would love to hear more about the Credo Clean Standard. That is, a badge in and of itself. But I want to sort of take a step way back and just get your perspective on certifications in general for products. I think we're starting to see a lot of progress being made in this space. You and I have talked a lot about Amazon Climate Pledge Friendly and the work that they've done. They have shared the data behind that program in particular that really shows the industry that badging your products in a sustainable way can in fact be a business driver for the brand. So I think a lot of learnings coming out of that program, but I'm sure you also have a lot of learnings coming out of Credo Clean Standard and just what you're seeing. So please, as a product sort of based company, I'd love for you to share your thoughts on this space that's rapidly evolving.
Yeah, it sure is rapidly evolving. And I feel like, there's often new certifications yearly, which is exciting. I think, for a consumer, certifications can be a really useful shorthand to understand, the back end of the product that they're purchasing. It can be a real trust driver and, a badge of transparency as well, depending on what sits behind that certification. It can also go the other way, right? Where it's kind of the bare minimum and the certification doesn't stand for much, or it's a lot of talk and a little action. They're not a substitute for doing the work. A brand should not badge themselves and say, okay, we did it, we're done. It should be, a step towards whatever that badge is for, and that goes for B Corp or non-GMO or, these climate pledge certifications. I think they're a really nice baseline. It's a nice way for the consumer to understand the marketplace and the landscape, but also for brands to see like-minded brands and to network. I think that that's an under-discussed area of certifications. It's a very easy way to see, who's kind of on your side of things and how can we band together. We've already talked about our pre-competitive collaboration with Pact and, this type of thing. That pre-competitive nature of anything is what drives industries forward. So I like that aspect of certifications just as much as, some certifications are beneficial. But I also think they can simplify really complex topics too much. And consumers really like a black and white, tell me what's good, bad, wrong, right. And often that's not the case. And we've seen a lot of certifications oversimplified to the fact that they've come under the fire later, because they're not upholding the standards as best as one should assume. So, it's really up to, unfortunately, the certifier, the certifying body to do that work. And sometimes it's not an independent, certifying body. So the onus still remains on the consumer to determine, what makes for a good certification and who am I going to trust, because we are seeing a lot more market and a lot more, little logos trying to make everyone feel better about the purchases, which is often oversimplification.
Absolutely. Could not agree more with that, Christina. I'm glad you brought that point up. And I thank you for highlighting the importance of rigor and transparency behind a certification. I think that is a very important message to send out. So back to sort of your comment around, gosh, there are a lot of these certifications coming on the scene. We're starting to see a lot of these certification programs take off. As a retailer, how do you even begin to navigate this space? It's really complex. I would imagine, you're speaking to all of the players. Maybe you have brands coming to you and saying they want to certify their products, or you're hearing from certification bodies that want to have their certifications under your platform. How do you even approach this complex space as a retailer?
Well, it's a great networking opportunity. I get to speak with so many people all the time about either their certification or a certification they're thinking about creating. To your point, we have a lot of dialogue with these folks. And in fact, I sat on the joint committee for the new personal care standard under NSF, the National Sanitation Foundation. They've just come up with a new personal care standard that I was, lucky enough to be able to provide input and vote on, which was really exciting. At the end of the day, it speaks to how underregulated, particularly the beauty industry is, but that's not unique to beauty, right? There's certifications in other industries as well. So Credo's point of view on certifications, at the end of the day, we have our Credo Clean Standard, this lofty, many requirements and lofty goals for brands to meet, and we evolve that every year. Just last year, we added a new agricultural commodities policy where ingredients that are linked to agricultural harm, deforestation, drought, these types of things, we're asking our brands to reevaluate the use of ingredients tied to that. So we are always evolving our clean standard, and we'll always require our brands to meet our clean standard. And certifications, depending on what they are, can be kind of icing on top of the cake, but it's not a requirement to have any one certification in order to be sold at Credo. Certifications can be expensive for small brands, and there's often an annual licensing or renewal fee. Many certifications don't necessarily have a third-party verifier or a third-party auditing program. So it's hard as a retailer to not, be pulled in behind the curtain on all of that. So we're just seeing, again, the icon, and brands just saying, we paid for this icon, so we're certified, which doesn't always mean a whole lot to us. And that's not unique to just a brand certifying themselves, but also a raw material that's been certified. So there's a lot of trade name ingredients that have been certified to certain standards. And again, we're not seeing that those ingredients are necessarily being audited on a, geographic region every quarter, or anything that would provide us a lot of confidence in these certifications. So we navigate it lightly. We try to speak with the certifying bodies that our brands are very interested in and get to know them very well. I certainly respect the work that's being done, but it's a nuanced conversation, and it really depends on what the certification is, who's running it, and, the purpose behind it too.
It almost seems like we're missing sort of a step in between the certifications and the brands and the retailers to sort of better vet and apply sort of a level of rigor to the overall process. So not suggesting a certification on a certification.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Someone told me recently, there were all these certifications out there, but none of them met what I wanted. So I created my own. And then, the person said, well, at the end of the day, now we just have N+1 certifications to meet,
Exactly. Yeah. I think your perspective is really important, and the message is clear that we really do need rigor and transparency on all levels of this complex web. So Amazing. Well, you mentioned something earlier, Christina, about the consumer. And as I come to understand, a consumer sort of education and transparency is a big part of your job. And I'm sure you're collecting a lot of insights on what the consumer actually wants and what the consumer actually does. So I guess I'll cast a very wide net and ask you a little bit more about how Credo engages consumers on these complex topics like ingredient safety and sustainability. Let's start there.
Yeah. It really, at the end of the day, depends on the consumer. We have the consumer who just wants a great red lipstick and that's all they're here for. And that's great. Beauty should be fun. You shouldn't have to have, a degree to determine, what a better, safer, more sustainable product is. So at the end of the day, you got to meet the consumer where they are, right? There's going to be the consumer who just wants a red lip. And then there's going to be the consumer who wants to understand where the ingredients came from, if it's cruelty-free, what the packaging is, how it was shipped, all of these questions. So our marketing team is amazing at this, and we really focus on storytelling and explaining why something matters and doing the education piece. And PCR, post-consumer recycled plastic packaging, is a perfect example of that. So we see a lot of consumers not understand what PCR is. You hear an acronym and you kind of go blank. I'm guilty of that as well. But if you can explain to the consumer in a storytelling method what PCR is, and the fact that it's not relying on, the fossil fuel industry to create more virgin plastic, but instead creating a marketplace for recycled plastic, that becomes a driving point for consumers and purchasing power. So once you've done the education, then all of a sudden the consumer is supporting that and bought in and we're seeing the data show will repurchase because of that. And I think refillable is a very easy concept for a consumer to understand. But when you look at the data, you have to refill X number of, times before you're offsetting any sort of climate input or output rather, versus when you're educating on PCR, there's an automatic, emissions reduction because you're not relying on virgin materials. So to be able to connect the dots for the consumer is really important. And our marketing team is excellent at the storytelling piece of that. But the end of the day, where I find power is the small pieces of this education throughout a consumer's journey. So, at the end of an email or a small social post or a little snippet at the bottom of a receipt, instead of these large, activations that overwhelm the consumer, just small pieces, here and there. Because at the end of the day, it's beauty. We're selling, products that are exciting and fun and should be that way. So we don't want to inundate with, the depth and darkness of climate.
Correct. No, I think you hit it on the head there, Christina. And what you're saying is that, if we educate the consumer in the right way and meet them where they are, they may actually buy more of the product, right? And I always wonder sort of what level of responsibility each sort of player in this web has to educate the consumer, right? And I think it's all about striking the right balance and really trying to understand your consumer a bit more and speak their language and communicate at the right times in the right way. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. And I think it's interesting. We're just finishing up our 3-year strategy on decarbonization, as you know. And, we're looking at and talking with experts about how this would resonate with the consumer. We've spoken a lot about our restricted ingredients. We've spoken a lot about our packaging. We've not spoken on a decarbonization plan or the fact that we do emissions, carbon accounting. And what does the consumer want to know about that area? I've heard mixed reviews, and a lot of people say, do the work. It's very important, but don't bring the consumer along for the ride. So I'm not sure that that's correct. We're going to play with things. And again, that's what's nice about being at Credo is we're able to act as that proof point and try different things and see what resonates. So hopefully we'll have more data to share as we get into that area of the work. But I think we'll see the dialogue and the discourse start changing over time, where consumers are very much interested in the climate discussion just as much as they are about the product. But at the end of the day, at least for beauty and personal care, the product needs to be effective and accessible and at a price point, that you can repurchase. So that's what our consumer cares about. The climate is, again, that icing on top.
Isn't that the theme, I feel like, recently, is that, you can't sacrifice any of the quality, the price for sustainability. And I think the more important theme is that it's possible, right? It's possible for brands and retailers to be thinking of these innovative solutions to solve for that and to hit all of those things. So great. I'm really glad that you're thinking about it in this way and driving change in a way that I think makes sense for everyone. So I am excited to start with our rapid fire round. Christina, are you ready?
Oh, good boy. Let's try.
Let's do it. So, what is one sustainability myth you wish would disappear?
This is easy. That natural is safe. So we have so many consumers just assume natural is the way to go. That's safer. That's more sustainable. And that's not often or always the case.
Wonderful. What is your personal favorite clean beauty swap?
Well, I live in a very dry climate at high elevation, so I'm all about moisturizing and hydrators. So I have a couple, but I would say my favorite moisturizer right now is the Dr. Rogers Skin Cream. It's really thick. All of the ingredients are biodegradable. So when it's rinsed down the drain, you can feel confident about, our waterways. And it is the thickest, most hydrating cream. It's perfect for a ski day.
Okay, plug for Dr. Rogers. What is a certification or a badge you trust most?
I have a bias to answering this question. So I worked at NSF for a bit on their non-GMO verification certification. So I was a toxicologist on that team verifying. So I know what goes into that program. So I trust it because I was on the inside.
That's a good answer. What is the one ingredient everyone should know about?
I'm going to do a class of ingredients, UV filters. So I'm a huge proponent of sunscreens. So whether it's a mineral sunscreen like zinc oxide or titanium dioxide, or a chemical sunscreen like octinoxate or oxybenzone, avobenzone, these ingredients are really important to protect our skin from a known carcinogen, which is the sun, right? So everyone should be choosing sunscreens that they enjoy wearing and actually wear them.
I love it. Spoken like a true mom, too. All right. What is the biggest impact opportunity in beauty right now?
There's so much. This is a loaded question, Emma. What I'm most excited about is packaging circularity. So as I mentioned, the new matter resin that's created from beauty empties. I love that story. I love that it's possible. I love that it, is at a price point that's, able to play in the market. And if we can continue scaling ideas for packaging circularity, I think that it's going to resonate very well with the consumer and also help push the industry forward. But I could equally say, biotechnology of ingredients. So leveraging lab synthesis to create bioidentical ingredients in a lab instead of using and depleting our environmental resources. So things like rose oil. I think I told you it takes about 1 million petals to create 1 ounce of rose oil. Perhaps we should be creating that in a lab instead of, farming and harvesting roses through our environment.
That is a wild statistic that will always stick with me, Christina. Well, I love that, and investing in innovation and science. And also, you have hope for the packaging industry, which is really nice to hear because I think that space can also feel very daunting to many of us in this space. So I'm really happy to hear that you're optimistic. All right. On that note, I would love to hear, Christina, let's leave it on a happy and hopeful note. What gives you hope about the future of sustainable retail?
I think it's the people involved. It's been so fun to get to know so many of the folks as I've, entered in the sustainability space the last decade. We see founders who are deeply invested in building brands and sustainability. We see, retailers invested in this, whether it's Credo or others. We see organizations like yourself supporting people doing the right work. I think it's the people behind it. And at the end of the day, it's the consumers asking the hard questions. If it's not good for sales, it's not going to happen. And we're seeing that it's very much good for sales. Consumers do care. This is something that is driving purchasing power. And so it's been fun to see all these people create incredible ideas and leverage their expertise to move this forward.
I've always said that this industry has the best combination of good people and intelligent people, and that combination is deadly in the best possible way. So, well, with that, Christina, unfortunately, our time is come to an end, and I just want to thank you so much for being on the show with me and ask you, where can our listeners follow along on Credo's sustainability journey or connect with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We could talk forever. We have a great mission section on our website where we have an impact report we update annually. So check it out. It's got some incredible statistics of what we're doing. And I'm also really active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks for tuning in to ESG Decoded. We hope this episode has inspired you to take action in your own ESG journey, stimulating ideas for partnership and innovation.
New episodes drop bi-weekly on Tuesday morning. Subscribe now on your favorite streaming platform to stay in the loop.
Join the conversation on social media using @ESG Decoded or visit climbco.com for more resources.
Until next time, keep decoding, keep innovating, and keep making a positive impact.